we did notice that it seemed like some of the wealthier districts were faring a little bit better, at least in terms of teachers that were that were highly qualified. Wealthier districts in general were better. This is one of the points here on have not as many teachers that not being highly qualified, and then in terms of not having as many teachers teaching out of field. And we also noted that it varied from by school, and that we really have to go down to the sub-level and look at what is going on at the school level and not just at the district level, because it varies from school to school and community to community, and it appears to have some impact in terms of social economic status of the community. We talked about the importance of, in terms of solutions, teacher preparation being an important thing that we have to look at, and the quality of the program candidates. We talked about how do we get more candidates to join the teaching profession and take a long-term view. Looking at how we do more grow your own programs, really trying to figure out how to get more teachers of color, and we went back to the point that Superintendent Hill made, that all of these factors are important, but it's also important to look at the heart and the commitment that a teacher has for working within that particular community, and looking at the teacher that we have here as a good example of someone who grew up in that community, committed to that community, saw other people who were that could be his role model to have him to want to be a teacher. We said some of the strategies would be education scholarship programs that could help us recruit more teachers, recruit more teachers of color, recruit more teachers who have English as their second language, and then to introduce teaching as a profession when kids are really in elementary school. I know we have, when I grew up, we have Future Teachers of America. We still have that, but that was one of the most powerful groups in my middle school and in my high school. And a lot of people wanted to be teachers then. We don't see that same emphasis now. We did talk about the economics of the profession and how we need to recruit more men into the profession, and there are economic challenges to doing that. So we went far beyond the matrix. It was kind of frustrating just looking at that and trying to figure out how do you solve the problem just looking at those categories. So we really went to, these are some of the things that we need to do. And lastly, we talked about the importance of strong mentoring and induction programs and doing that statewide. And that for us to be able to do all of this with, we've got a big challenge to try and do it without additional, funding. It's huge. So, did I miss anything?
Just real quickly, as we went over the data, I'm going to be interested to hear how other folks saw this. There was no question that inexperience was the reddest of the categories in our particular case as we looked down the schools.
And we didn't think that was necessarily a bad thing, because we don't know. Again, it goes to, you're looking at the data, but we have good young teachers, and we need more teachers to go into the field. So.
You guys want to go next?
Yes. We had ESD 101, and we started by noting certain patterns. We also saw that rural areas were more likely to have the non-highly qualified or more out of field. And also poverty seemed to be a driving factor, especially in rural areas where they may have difficulty attracting teaching staff. We also saw that non-traditional program staffing may not check the highly qualified boxes, so whatever their program is that works for them may look different than what highly qualified requires. So for strategies, we have recruiting, which is a lot of what Pasco was talking about, and that seems to be effective because it identifies what a specific area needs, and that's also just another strategy is determining what the area needs and specifically what the district needs for its students, and then how to get those, whether it's experience or in field. And another thing is to get effective professionals to teach with expertise, like getting professors. Dan's example was a chemistry professor that is fine on a teacher's salary just because they love to teach, and putting those people in our classrooms. This is like alternative pathways to certification. Julia was saying that it was PESB. That's looking at things like that, so other professionals can be instructing without having to, become actual teachers through certification. And districts taking advantage of certification waivers for professionals, like a local symphony director can be hired as like a specialist in a school, which is still a teacher but not a certificated teacher. And so something that this was kind of like a problem with this, I guess. We saw like in the union there could be competition between teachers for bringing in, if you brought in, for example, a professor, then it takes the place of maybe a science teacher, like a certificated teacher. And then competition between districts for innovative programs. In rural areas, if they can't necessarily offer monetary incentives, they can see what resources they do have, such as land, to incentivize people to come out. Like, if you come and sign a 2-year teaching contract, you can have 5 acres of land. And then we had recognition and morale boosters. Just it's really important to recognize that teachers that may not have any 3 of these things are still doing great things for our kids, and we need to recognize the work that they're doing, because we want good teachers to stay where they are and help the kids because they're doing a good job. And also, content mentoring from private sectors, people that may not want to be in the classroom teaching but can provide really good support to teachers that are in our classrooms.
That's true. Last but not least, please, one of you guys.
So I was kind of smiling and nudging Janice as Deborah was talking, because I could just say what she said. Pretty much. It was remarkable how I just went right down our list and almost the exact same kind of phrasing. It was really interesting. The first thing that we noticed is that there wasn't any pattern that we could discern the way the data were displayed unless you overlaid it on a map or arranged it in order of achievement index or something that we couldn't really, so we kind of gave up on that really quickly, saying, well, the important thing is to, think about root causes and strategies. So I don't have much to report out in terms of patterns. That gets added. A random distribution of color wouldn't be any different than what we were looking at. That's what it felt like. And we noticed that there were several schools that had a lot of red, and that people knew had really good reputations. So that was that for patterns. And then we talked about school leadership being one of the biggest bangs for your buck. That if we, that maybe, if not I would argue but if not one of the biggest issues is that if you have really good quality leadership, people come and people stay. And that would be important to think about recruiting, compensating adequately, things like that, to promote good leadership or to develop leadership. We also talked about the supply side and how the challenge of getting really good candidates in the door of preparatory programs, and how do you incentivize that. We also talked about recruiting future teachers of America. we talked about that. I said, how about a teacher ROTC, where you're growing your own, where you're really early ages, especially in places like Pasco and other places around the state where you have successful educational programs, and you have students of diversity, and you recognize that talent early, and you recruit and you grow discussion about making sure that displaced teachers didn't end up in the highest need schools. What am I missing, you guys? Maria, if you could wrap up, yeah.
I'll wrap up real fast. So thank you for that very quick opportunity, and we are gonna include this and clean this up, what we wrote, but feature it in the plan. I just wanted to show one last slide that's on the deck. Deborah asked about so what, so we turn in a plan and what happens with it, so this is the so what. The plan is a plan. We have a method and a timeline as far as what we're going to do and implement within which years, and we are trying right now to tie what specific goals we feel confident we can meet within those years. So we will be reporting back to you in future years, and this leadership team at OSPI to look at the equity plan data will continue to meet. And the last bit about this is that we are layering this on a map, so you can see if there are regional patterns or clusters, although as you all observed, this is not as patterned as we thought it might be. It's not as regional as we thought it might be, and so it makes it kind of flies a little differently than national research that says, you know, rural remotes always struggle on this. Not always, you know, or urbans always struggle in these ways, not always. So we're a very unique state in that regard. So we're going to show you a little more data. In the final plan, we will disseminate it to staff, and so you can look through the way we presented it and be able to continue to participate with us in this process. So thank you very much.
Trey?
From a next step thing, is this something the Department of Education, you're turning in, they're reviewing, approving, or sending back? Is it that kind of exercise where, you know, they say, well, you didn't do this, or you did that and we approve it?
Yeah.
And then secondly, how do we involve, because a lot of the things we're talking about derive power out of the legislature.
Yeah.
How does the Department of Education or this team or plan to include our legislative body, the state legislature, into this plan so that it can be possibly implemented?
Yeah, those are both good. So the first one, we have to submit on June 1st. We've asked multiple times, can we have an extension? They said no. The department is very clear that if we turn in something that doesn't meet their expectations, that they'll work with us to do better.
I mean, so are they scoring it? I mean, I'm trying to.
They haven't told us how they're going to review it.
They probably don't know.
So
Okay.
I'm trying to be fair with what I know. So they haven't shared how it will be evaluated, but if it's not adequate, we'll have opportunities to edit it. For the legislature, a lot of our strategies are either things that are currently going on, like compensation reform, which, you know, we're citing all the existing legislation and trying to build that context for the Department of Ed. But there are some asks, and we actually are going to, the leadership team I'm briefing Superintendent Dorn next week on what the leadership team's asks are. One of them is statewide induction and mentoring, that we ask the legislature to fully fund that, to fully fund professional development. There's a couple of those ones that are very significant asks, and they also put in the scholarship, a state scholarship, kind of similar to, and loan forgiveness, similar to the federal scholarships and loan forgivenesses for serving in certain areas. So those are big asks, and they're future oriented, and we don't know if we'll get them from the legislature. So that's what the leadership team came up with, is effective strategies. We will brief our superintendent and see if we're all in final agreement that those are our strategies, and then we have to work, we put in the plan for next year to actually get those bills dropped and potentially to see if there's any momentum. The compensation thing is the biggest elephant, and seeing whether we meet the full McCleary obligations would actually hit a lot of the areas that the group identified. So.
One last question, and then we are going to take a break, because we have several more things to get through on the agenda. What would be your ask of the state board in terms of supporting the plan once it's been approved, I guess, by the U.S. Department of Education?
Thanks for that.
Role.
Yeah, I think your role, as Julia outlined it, is to really think through which policy levers are ones that you guys have authority over and would be willing to lean in on. Or if you feel strongly that you support certain aspects of the plan. You know, I don't know if there's a public statement about it, but we're trying to build momentum around the funding and also just the ways that we need to look at increasing the teacher workforce and getting more into the field and, you know, all the things you guys surfaced today. So I think a public statement would be really helpful. I think thinking through which of the things that we outlined as strategies you have authority to address and make a statement about those.
And if we have further questions or comments, we'll send them on your way. So